Welcome back to season 15 of the Neuroscience Meets Social and Emotional Learning podcast. I'm Andrea Samadi, and it's here that we bridge the science behind social and emotional learning, emotional intelligence, and practical neuroscience so we can create measurable improvements in well-being, achievement, productivity, and results. Now, when we launched this podcast 7 years ago, it was driven by a question that I'd never been taught to ask, not in school, not in business, and not in life. And the question was, if results matter, and they matter now more than ever before, how exactly are we using our brain to make these results happen? Now, most of us weren't taught what to do. Very few of us were taught how to think under pressure, or how to regulate our emotions, or how to sustain our motivation, or even how to produce consistent results without burning out. And that question led me to a deep exploration of the mind-brain results connection and how neuroscience applies to everyday decisions, to our conversations, and our performance. And that's why this podcast exists. Each week, we bring you leading experts to break down complex science and then translate it into practical strategies that we can all apply immediately. And we've been reviewing past episodes for the past 2 seasons, but every now and then, when I see someone doing something innovative, I want to learn more. And today's guest sits right at the intersection of biology, AI, and human potential. For today's episode number 386, we're joined by Thoryn Stephens. He's a scientist, a molecular biologist, a data visionary, and the founder and CEO of Brain.One. Brain.One is an AI-powered health optimization platform, and it's designed to transform scientific research into personalized, actionable protocols using real-time data from wearables like Apple Health, the Oura Ring, and Garmin. Now, instead of generic wellness advice, Brain.One analyzes research literature and biometric inputs to build precision microhabits. It targets sleep architecture, metabolic health, our cognitive performance, stress regulation, and even dementia risk reduction. Its protocols are used by high-performing athletes, executives, and longevity-focused individuals seeking not just better performance, but long-term brain resilience. From insomnia reduction to high-altitude performance to evidence-based dementia prevention, and it was inspired by the Lancet 2020 framework, Brain.One is attempting something ambitious to make human optimization measurable, systematic, and scalable. So today we're going to explore, can AI truly personalize our brain health? What are the biological bottlenecks that limit our human potential? And what does prevention look like before decline begins? Let's welcome Thoryn Stephens to the podcast. Thoryn Stephens, welcome to the Neuroscience Meets SEL podcast. Here we focus on measurable results. And you're talking to someone who's got a wearable, and I measure everything. So
Okay.
I'm so excited to talk with you today.
Awesome. Some of my favorite topics.
Awesome. This is cool. This is cool. So I just want to go back to the very beginning because you've got quite a background. I listened to some of your earlier podcasts, and I put links in the show notes for people that want to dive deep because you've done a lot of things. Like the whole Ecuador experience was interesting. I wouldn't have wanted to have been your teacher back then, of you running off into the wild. But anyway, so if you could begin and just orient our listeners to maybe the problem you saw with human performance and brain health that made you say, I'm going to build a system to fix this problem. If we could start there.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds great. So briefly about my background, I'm a molecular biologist by training. Began my career in small molecule drug therapeutics, working in biotech. We were the generation that sequenced the human genomes. This is roughly, the early 2000s. And then I was like, oh, wait, what about the proteome and then the epigenome and everything else happening in that gene expression model? But very much a researcher at my core and molecular and cell biology. And then fast forward, I had a career in data science and also very much focused in the concept of measurement and measurement on a molecular level and then also on a human basis. And so I was developing models essentially to optimize human behavior online and really just focused in data science and measurement. It's kind of really been the thread throughout my career ultimately. And it was about 2 years ago. I was here in Colorado and I broke my clavicle. I am an aggressive human. I'm very athletic, and in the winters we try to ski every day. And I was doing a backside spin and I slipped and ultimately heard the crack. And I went into the Stedman Institute. And so Stedman is the number one orthopedic, arguably in the country. All the NFLers and NBAers generally come here or in Vail. And long story short, they did the X-ray. The doctor's like, "It's completely broken. See you in 6 weeks," and threw me a sling. And that was my recovery. And my recovery, I guess, protocol, quote unquote. And I asked her, I was like, "So this is it?" And she's like, "Yep. See you in 6 weeks." And so I went back and I was just forming Brain.One at the time. And I knew I wanted to do something around biological optimization. And I went to my network and I was like, "Guys, I broke my clavicle. What do you recommend?" And they're like, bone broth, collagen, nutrition. And so I went on a protocol basically and followed a regimen that included these things, collagen supplements and like big bison stews. And then I also did a localized PEMF, PEMF, if you're familiar with that modality. It's electrical magnetic current essentially through the bone. They think it helps stimulate growth and whatnot. And I was traveling, and so I was supposed to go back in 6 weeks. I went back in four. And she does the x-ray and she's like, "Oh my gosh, you've completely healed. We've never seen a bone heal this fast. What have you been doing?" And I was like, "Doctor, I've been focusing on my nutrition." And she looks me straight in the face and she's like, "Wow, we never would have thought of that." And that was one of those moments where I was like, okay, there's just absolutely something here. We need better. And when I talk about a protocol, it's really just a daily routine. It's things that you do. You have one, Andrea. I'd love to hear about your morning protocol. But it's just, when you wake up in the morning, what are those things that you check off the list, basically? And it can be highly structured or not. Doesn't necessarily matter as long as you're following some sort of a framework. And that was the beginning of Brain.One.
Oh, I love it. I love it. You're talking to the right person here because I believe that, your day, it starts that morning time. It's critical what you do, you know.
100%.
So as soon as I saw your story, I thought I jumped on this. I thought I've got to figure out what you're doing. And we just did a review of Dr. Bruce Perry. He talks about he did a book with Oprah, What Happened
Okay.
to You and Trauma in the Brain. And he talks about how we have unlimited or untapped potential within us. And so I just thought, what about you? Do you think we have potential within us? And maybe what are some things that prevent us from expressing some of our untapped potential?
Sure. Yeah, I think absolutely we all have untapped potential, and certainly a impediment could be trauma, from childhood and so forth. But I'm a big believer through the right modalities that we can deal with those traumas and ultimately, transcend and supersede them. And I'm very much a human. There's a Japanese principle called Kaizen of continual improvement. It's been applied in engineering, but I apply it to my daily life and just that idea that you're continually improving and getting better. And a reflection of that, neurologically could be the concept of, neurogenesis and the idea that we're still building new neural pathways all the way into our 60s and 70s. And so your brain, much like your biology, is not static. It's ultimately dynamic and changing, which goes back to that whole gene expression model in the beginning that, we have a genetic blueprint that we're following, but the expression of your DNA to RNA to proteins can be dependent on things like your environment and your daily routine and the people you surround yourself with. So I think it's actually very empowering, and there's really no limit.
Do you focus on certain modalities? Like, so we all know sleep, nutrition, you've already talked about it. We have six that we have, figured since the pandemic that
Sure.
just came forward. What would
Yeah.
be your top health
Yeah.
staples?
So, yeah, we talk about nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress, and then connection. Those are kind of our five pillars, which I'm sure are very similar to yours.
Yeah, we just had, I've been talking to lots of people over the years, and I asked people, what am I missing? And someone said, you're missing the stress reduction part of it,
Sure. Yeah.
which is important for, you talk about the morning. I'd like to know what is your morning protocol? I'd love it to know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am up quite early. Of late, it's been like 5 a.m. And I try to get direct sunlight as soon as possible, but we live in a valley here in Colorado, and so the sun doesn't actually come over one of the mountains till about 9 a.m. So unfortunately, I don't get it first thing. But direct sunlight, circadian regulation is absolutely a pillar, as well as hydration. I also have a biocharger here at the house, which is a giant Tesla coil. And there's different protocols. And so I'll do roughly a 30-minute biocharging session. And then it depends on how much I'm training. I do some peptides and I do NAD. So generally BPC if I'm like heavily training, and then NAD I've been doing more recently, intramuscular, and I do that about twice a week, sometimes three times a week. And then some level of prayer and connection, whether it's to yourself, to the universe, whatever you'd like to call it. But that's generally my core pillars. And then on the nutritional side, I mentioned hydration, but also high protein of some kind.
Love it. Now, can you tell me a bit more about the Tesla coil? Because I don't know what exactly you're with the Tesla.
Sure. Yeah. So it's this, it's not even necessarily new, but so Nicholas Tesla, really spearheaded the idea of using different types of frequencies essentially in healing. And this was actually pretty prevalent here in the United States through the, 30s, I'd say. And then the FDA, they didn't outlaw it, but they, didn't really, they kind of questioned the scientific credibility. And so a lot of the research then went to Germany and to Russia. But high level, it's the idea that you have different resonant frequencies that can ultimately help humans, under different morbidities or comorbidities or whatever it might be. I use it more for for things like brain activation as a protocol, or it could be recovery. And you just basically sit in front of this thing and you can hold up a light bulb and it shows how much EMF is actually in the air. But yeah, we've seen some pretty interesting and very positive results using these types of frequency modalities. Another example your audience could try, which are not super expensive, is called PEMF. Again, PEMF, and you can get a PEMF mat. And a couple $100 roughly. I think now the prices have really come down quite a bit. And these are all things that you can now do at home.
Okay, so I'm thinking it might be similar to a Fisher Wallace brain stimulator type thing. It sounds very familiar, like that you put on your head, and they have evolved over time. But it sounds very similar when you're talking about the background. Would you?
Yeah, actually don't know the Fisher Wallace offhand.
Okay. But
But yeah.
something you put around it stimulates something like, from
It could be. So sometimes they're using magnets for that type of stuff. So like TCMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. And yeah, we also hear some really positive results around that too. And that's actually FDA approved.
okay.
So, a lot of these things, I come out of also the world of triathlon. So I began doing Ironmans when I was in my 30s. And it was through that idea of, optimizing biology, using data. And a lot of these things that we used to do in triathlon, no one had ever heard of. I like red light. I remember 10 years ago, one of my buddy Dean, he had a red light on his knee. We're like, what are you doing, Dean? He's like,
Right.
mitochondrial stimulation, like, 10 plus years ago. Things like cold plunging. And, now these are available. And, more and more people are just incorporating that into their daily protocol, their daily routine.
Oh, I love this. This is really cool. I've tried everything. You interview lots of people, you get different ideas, and I'm
Sure.
around the same time, like maybe a bit earlier. I'm up in the 4 range, and
Okay. Yeah.
turn on the sauna. So we've got
Okay. Awesome.
sauna to help, and I find that because I measure everything, I used to hike every day, and
Yeah.
then as I was getting older, I started noticing inflammation
Yep.
showing up in blood tests.
Okay.
and then so I thought, what am I going to do? I can't keep the same amount of activity. I've got to slow down somewhere. So that's where I thought maybe the sauna could still continue to build that the cardio, but not pounding on the joints, right?
Yeah.
That's
A
where I
hundred.
put that in.
Yeah. I would agree. And also just the sweat, the catharsis. Another one of my micro habits in my routine, not as much in the morning. Usually it's in the evening, but I do hot Pilates 3 days a week here. And in that idea of again, you're combining, and I do it with weights. So you have exercise, you have stretching, and we go all the way to probably zone 4 cardio. Burpees and all of the things, and then I sweat about 2 liters of water out. And whether it's sauna, whether it's could be any type of modality where you're really sweating like that, but it's absolutely critical. And that catharsis is, I think, so important to your overall health.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. It helps just everything as you're getting older. You got to find some treatments to keep us going and, keep us young. And which brings me to the next question, because
Sure.
I started thinking about my brain health when I started, really looking at the brain and neuroscience and how to keep our brains healthy. And I actually went and got my brain measured at Daniel Amen's clinics.
Okay, of course.
Did a
Yeah.
scan, and I was really curious, like what's he going to see? Uh,
Yeah.
and they said that it looked like I had the same brain pattern as someone who's sleep deprived.
Mm.
So it was interesting to me. It looked
Yeah.
like similar to
Yeah.
traumatic brain injury, and so I was getting up super early, scrimping on sleep because in Arizona you got to finish your exercise
Of
before
course.
8 or you're
Yeah.
you're gone. So I was
Cooked.
scrimping
Yep.
on sleep, and it was showing up on the brain. But I was
Yeah.
really curious about dementia, and but not everyone can do a brain scan and figure out, am I tracking? So what would you say? How would you talk to somebody who's 40 or 50? What interventions do you know of that we can start to figure out our brain health for dementia?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, a couple points. One, again, depending on the severity of the condition, we think of brain measurement as a spectrum. And a lot of like the early brain research was done with qualitative surveys, not even actually until, the imaging and so forth progressed. We have a partnership with a group. They do EEG. So, if we look at the resolution, you have QEEG, higher resolution, but EEG, they're called WAVI. They're based here in Boulder, Colorado. And you can go in and they have over 400 practitioners across the country, but they have these brain caps with 18 different nodes, and you can get a plethora of data just out of a 20-minute brain scan. And it's not super expensive, couple $100, and at least then you'll know your baseline. So that's where we usually always begin to recommend is understanding what is that baseline. And there's different mechanisms of measurement. EEG is one. We have another kit that we utilize that has subjective as well as objective testing. So blood biomarkers that look at kind of the blueprint of the brain. So EPA, DHA, omega-3, omega-6, inflammatory climate. And so you can look at your biomarkers there, and then you can also look at your cognition, processing speed, executive function, and there's all kinds of measurement around that. And once we have an understanding of the baseline, then we can build a very structured plan around that. And we have a number of partners that we work with across the country to do this stuff in person if needed. And then to answer your question, there's a beautiful paper that was written initially in 2017. It's a meta-analysis. Now it's called the Lancet 2024. It just came out again last year. Initially, they had 12, essentially what we call micro habits or behavioral modifications, changes. We talked about earlier my morning routine. I consider every one of those things a micro habit, and ultimately you can stack the micro habits, and ultimately that becomes your daily protocol. In the case of Lancet 2020, 2024, they've outlined 14 different what are called modifiable risk factors or behaviors that you could change. And if humans were to follow these, then 30 to 40% of global dementia cases could be essentially reversed or at least supported. And whereas, Alzheimer's, you have a genetic predisposition where you can't necessarily stop the onset of the disease, you can still help support, the onset of the condition and the symptoms, basically. And so that's something that we really think a lot about is behavior modifications and the things that you can do. And so, one example, it could be something like TBI, traumatic brain injury and the impacts of what that means in your long-term propensity for dementia, or hearing loss is another big one. LDL cholesterol just came out this last year. Social isolation is actually another very, very big one. We talk a lot about that relative to connection, and that could be connection to your community. It could be connection to God, spirit, whatever you want to call it. But just that ability to connect and, to have a community. And generally, people that have that connection purpose, have a life expectancy of 10 to 12 years longer. So those are, all really important. We consider them micro habits. And, we try to evangelize people starting this stuff in their 30s and 40s and 50s, not in their 60s and 70s as amyloid plaques and, a lot of these tau proteins have basically progressed. So trying to start earlier and, making these kind of part of your day-to-day non-negotiables. So,
So this is good. So you've set us all up here. So you've had quite a background in research. You measure everything. You've found a need there's a gap here in health. You went to the doctor and they missed it with you. They didn't diagnose you the way that your colleagues did when they gave you,
sure,
right? And so now, where are we with now bring in AI because AI is a big part of Brain.One. So
sure.
how does AI now factor into what you've developed here?
Yeah, absolutely. So we use AI in a couple different models. So one is we use it actually for content and the ability to take a scientific paper like the Lancet 2020 and run it through and then summarize it and have it easily digestible. So we have a whole editorial model that we've built and we went from 50 to 100 to 1,000 scientific papers essentially. And then making that, the content again easily digestible for my grandmother to read and understand. And so, really making it more accessible, I guess I would say. And that's been kind of an integral part of the model. And then secondly is actually using the AI to help humans optimize their day to day. And so the concept of what's called adaptive AI. And the idea there is that you can come into Brain.One. You could download a dementia prevention protocol. You could be women's health, whatever it might be, and you could follow that for a period of time, and then we could understand a baseline of your data, and that could be based on biometrics, on biomarkers. It could be based on we're actually doing some interesting stuff with voice recordings, and you could what we've seen is correlations of heart rate variability out of voice. So all of these different types of modalities that then the adaptive AI would adapt a protocol based on that data and ultimately adapt and personalize it for you, Andrea, based on all that, the data processing, basically.
So what are you tracking mostly at Brain.One? And I went there, so I went there and I put my name in because I'd love to get a protocol for brain health for
Sure.
is it coming? Is it
Yeah, so we're currently live with a number of brain practitioners. So we've really gone B2B. So that's what we've focused on from a business perspective. But we do have a wait list, and I'd be happy to put you to the front of the list, and we could work on a brain protocol together.
Oh, that would be awesome. I would love that. Thank you.
Yeah, but relative to what we track, I mean, it's really a multimodal model. So we started off with clinical assessments, and then we added in biometrics. So we have over 300 biometrics today in the system, and then we went to biomarkers. And so now you can come to Brain.One and you can upload a medical test. It could be a WAVI EEG as an example, and then we anonymize it, by the way, and then it actually spits back uh, a standardized, essentially report based on that data. And so BCIs are very, very interesting. EEG as a subset of BCI. And then where we're going is the concept of what's called multi-omics. Are you familiar with that, Andrea?
No, I don't know that term.
So we talk about genomics, as again, sequencing of the human genome, and that's been pretty well productized. Multiomics is the next step going all the way to the proteome. So you have your what's called proteomics, which is the expression of your DNA through RNA to proteins. And then in between, you have epigenetics, or what's called the epigenome, and then the transcriptome, and even the metabolome. And so these are just essentially large, think of it as it's almost like a database of your genetic material, your protein expression, your RNA transcripts, essentially. And it's really the most detailed view of your biology at the end of the day. And so that's where we're going. We're not quite there yet, but that's on the roadmap.
Okay, this is really exciting. So, um, I heard you talk about some of the wearables that you're compatible with. So I wear
Sure.
Whoop. Is Are you compatible with Whoop or?
So I don't actually love Whoop. I would say again, it depends on my training. So normally I'll have an Aura. So I sleep with an Aura ring, and that's because it's the least invasive and lowest EMFs. But then I also will do activity with the Garmin. So usually I'm wearing my Garmin, but when I was really doing Ironmans and triathlons, Garmin was it. And it also has the highest resolution. My day to day, I might use an Apple Watch, or I may use a Whoop, depending. So those are probably the top, four that I use on a regular basis.
Okay, sounds good. And so when someone wants to come to Brain.One, so they're like,
Sure.
hey, they're measuring things. And I was actually talking with one of my friends like a couple hours ago, and she was saying, I'm having these symptoms. And I said, have you ever taken your blood and sent it in to somebody to look at it and give
Sure.
you their thoughts on it? So that would be a part of this, right? You could upload your blood tests, your biomarkers, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. We haven't based our business around that. There's a lot of companies that are now doing this. You have the Function Health of the world, Rhythm Health. There's really, it's been pretty well commoditized, but we will partner with those types of organizations essentially, and then make that as easy as possible for the human to do exactly what you're talking about. There's what's called the Tasso. Have you seen the Tasso? That's like it's a device. It goes on the arm, and it's pretty non-invasive, although you can get some scarring. But it basically just does a capillary-based blood draw out of your arm, essentially. And you can do that at home. You send it in, and then you get the results. And that's been again pretty well productized. So the good news is a lot of these things you don't need to go in to a Quest or a LabCorp to get the data. You can do it from home. There's pros and cons of that though, depending on the type of blood and the biomarkers you're looking for. But a lot of these things again have been commoditized, and you don't even need to leave your house anymore.
So you're giving me such an overview of like advancement. I haven't heard of some of these. I know the glucose monitor. I didn't know we could take our blood at home. So
Yeah.
this is amazing. Thank you
Oh
so
yeah, 100%. And yeah, there's another test we use. One's called Brain Span, and that's an example. It's a finger prick, and you get six blood brain-related biomarkers. So yeah, so it's exciting. I mean, I think we also really try to, edge on the side of affordability and accessibility. And so a lot of these things, the diagnostics can definitely get expensive, but relative to your brain routine, a lot of these things you can also do for free. And, an example of your autonomic or parasympathetic regulation could be something like breath work or cold plunging. And that's also another part of my regimen. Usually do it maybe twice a week. We'll do it here in the rivers in Colorado. But, that would be another example of something that you can basically do at home in a cold shower for free.
the cold shower is hard for me. Like I
Yeah, it's actually very hard for me too.
really,
Yeah, I can go in the river or I can go into a cold plunge, like no problem, but the cold shower is pretty brutal.
yeah, really hard. I've tried everything. I can barely get to 3 minutes. It's like,
Yeah. Well, it's not bad depending on the temperature. Yeah. I was with a buddy in Venice not too long ago, and he was doing the bowl with ice. So if you can't do like a full cold plunge, and so there you're holding your breath and then putting your face underwater. And I found that to be somewhat effective. Not quite as effective as full body, of course, but yeah, pretty cool.
wow, this is eye-opening. So, tell me a little bit more about where you see people are. Like, not everybody measures their data. So what are some, maybe some misconceptions that you'd like to share or help people to understand with what you're doing?
Yeah, I think the measurement piece is important, but it's also important to not over-index and get too obsessive. I was talking to a client earlier today, and she mentioned every time she looks at her Whoop, it says the same thing. And that's actually, I also think, a limitation of Whoop is that
Ah,
it'll tell you what's wrong. Your HRV
oh,
is down 25%. It doesn't tell you how to fix it.
that,
And so
that is huge. That is
it's,
huge. Like, and I can just give you an example.
please,
For
yeah.
like almost 2 years, it
Yeah.
took me, you're overtraining and
Yep.
not getting enough sleep. And I'm like, how do I fix this?
Right.
Honestly, I had no idea.
Yeah, no, you're not alone. And we hear this all the time. And that's actually one of the kind of the core tenets of Brain.One is behavioral change. And so, not just so taking in the data is one thing, and that's helpful, back to your initial question. But the biggest challenge is not really the measurement, it's actually getting the action done in the human side, and my business background, I did a bunch of private equity work and we'd buy companies and I'd come in and I would basically rebuild the technology or integrate it and so forth. And what I saw was that technology was never the problem. It was the human behavior. It's the humans behind. And it's so hard to teach someone to do one thing, let alone to do a full protocol. Getting up in the morning and getting direct sunlight or drinking 2 glasses of water or whatever it might be. It's a challenge. And so that's where we've seen the most successful models using things like cognitive behavioral therapy, where you have cue and rewards and you're really incentivizing and educating a person to get the thing done. But we also find often in our types of protocols, people are very interested, in improving their health. So our retention, our adherence is generally quite high.
I think everybody wants to feel better, right? I think we just don't know how.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean you're not taught, we're
Yeah.
barely taught nutrition in schools alongside our doctors. Our doctors get, like our primary care. I mean, how many days of nutrition do they learn in medical school? Not many. I mean, I've heard as few as like, a handful. So it's very, very unfortunate. And then let alone things like nervous system regulation. We're not really, maybe in high school, you're taught about the nervous system, on the basics, maybe in college, depending on what you studied. But yeah, it's a bit of a challenge. And that's why you're seeing this new movement of health. And I really believe the idea of the human health protocol is really the future. And you see that in other books. Huberman, his latest book was called Protocols. We launched a year before he even published his book. But my background again coming from molecular biology and then Ironmans and so forth. That's what we would follow. Whether you're sequencing DNA or you're optimizing for a Ironman distance triathlon, you're following a protocol. It's just a series of steps. And the data is helpful because then it shows you if you're improving or not. That
Right.
was one of my, big aha moments. And this is back when we had the big chunky Garmins, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago now, probably. And just using things like this was even before it was just heart rate basically back then before HRV or resting heart rate or all these like metrics we now get out of the box. But I was able to utilize heart rate and then see I could attenuate my lactic threshold going stronger, longer, faster, da da da. And so I could optimize my biology essentially through the data. And I'm a little bit of an anomaly, like you mentioned, you're very measured. I think of measurement too, again, as a spectrum, and you got people over here like Brian Johnson, who's measuring literally every iota of his being, which is okay, but I also believe it shouldn't, impede your quality of life and the time that you spend outdoors or with your family or doing the things that you love. So while I don't drink a lot of alcohol, I'll have a glass of wine occasionally, or I don't try to really have zero sugar. I'll have ice cream with my wife or whatever it might be. So I think it's important to really allow yourself a little bit of slack and not let the data override everything, but still be measured.
It's true. It's true. We could get crazy with it all and and I do. I sometimes do. I cut everything out and the numbers are great, but like honestly, like how much fun am I having? So yeah,
Well, yeah, and that's it. It's quality of life. Like if you're not enjoying what you're doing, whether it's work or whether it's your regimen or your routine or your protocol, all these things are really important. So trying to find that joy, which is not always easy, but that's one of the secrets.
definitely. So this is cool. So your audience, who are you targeting for this? Like I saw you and I thought I need to know what this is. I
Sure.
want to talk with you. So elite athletes, executive.
Yeah.
People like me that just want to feel better? Who are you talking?
All of the above. Yeah, we have a partnership with an amazing NFL Super Bowl champion. His name's Malik Jackson. Very incredible athlete and just amazing human. He's an example of someone that we're working with. Certainly executives. I live here in Colorado, so we do a lot of peak performance where we're just you know, uphilling and climbing mountains on a regular basis. And so again, a lot of these things like peptides and measurement and, a lot of this now is going mainstream. We've been doing for decades, in some instances. So that's been a big part of our core audience. And then I'd say more generally, people interested in longevity, that kind of functional medicine approach, the whole human, how do you really optimize your life across, these different modalities to live the best life that you possibly can.
Love it. I love what you've created here, Thoryn. This is amazing.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah, I appreciate it, Andrea.
you
Appreciate your
know,
questions.
oh, for sure. So, like, fast forward 10 years, you did kind of give us the vision. So, the vision
Sure.
is that we all are tapped into your system, that we know our protocols, and we make them a part of our life because we know that we're going to measure and we're going to see improvements. Would you say that your vision would be that we all improve somehow with a protocol, or tell me what your vision?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think, I'd love to give away vision is to reach 1 billion humans, but give away, hundreds of millions of these protocols for free and just have people have at least a basic framework to follow to avoid dementia. Our grandparents, our parents, they all should, our children to some degree, but, they should all be following some type of framework around that. So that's definitely one of the visions. I think the concept of, again, your gene expression being dependent on your environment is very interesting to me. And, that idea that you can really, again, improve your biology and your health based on the things that you do, which makes sense. But I think as we get more and more data around this, it's going to be very interesting and very exciting.
I'm going to follow you for sure because this is right up my lane. And this is why I do the podcast. Honestly, it's to hear what's new and see how can we help people. And it's important for me as well that my podcast doesn't have ads. The whole
Sure, of
give
course.
back is why I do
Yeah,
it. So,
amazing.
it's cool to hear that that's your vision as well.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it has to be greater, I think, than ourselves. And that's really always been my mission and vision.
Love it. Love this. So, Thoryn, what have I missed? I've really asked you a lot from listening to your stuff. I didn't talk about Ecuador, although that's like really fascinating. You go listen to those podcasts about your whole plant and just understanding that, like when I listened to that, I thought it was really neat that we can change our brain with different modalities, and you went that way. But then you also talked about how that we could with prayer or meditation. There's lots of different ways to access consciousness, and
100%.
I
Yeah.
thought that was amazing, really neat.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so the story behind that, I was 15 in the upper Amazon of Ecuador, and I drank huachuma, which is also called San Pedro, which is it's a psychedelic cactus, mescaline based, similar to peyote here in North America. And that was my first foray into plant medicines. And then since then, I've had a very deep practice in various plant medicines, ranging from the Native American church and peyote to the jungles of Peru and Brazil and whatnot. And I think of these as tools to tune consciousness. And the irony of these modalities and these types of medicines is that you also realize you don't need them at all. Through breath and also through meditation and prayer, you can reach these, essentially states of consciousness as well. I consider psychedelics to be a catalyst to get you there sooner. But yeah, very, very fascinating.
Yeah, no, I love that. So have I missed anything? Is there anything that you think that was important other than the whole Ecuador thing? I thought I've got to tie that in somehow.
No, I think, yeah, that all sounds great. Just again, just the feeling of empowerment, for your audience that people like while you might have a genetic predisposition, you also have power in your behavior and the behavioral changes you make, the people you surround yourself with. I'm a big believer in that. But all these things impact your biology and it could be your mental health, your physical health. And you do have some, ability to regulate that. So I guess, that might be a prominent message would be the empowerment that we have to, really help improve our lives, our families, and so forth.
Because I believe, and I think you believe, that we can change our brain, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah,
Love,
absolutely. Yeah,
love.
I mean, there's data around that, like through language or learning an instrument or even dance into your old age, you can continue to, what's called neuroplasticity. You can continue to rebuild different neural connections. And then again, that goes into your later stages of life. So, instruments are a really good example. I'm also a musician, but that idea through learning a new instrument that you can rebuild those neural pathways, it's really fascinating.
Oh, it is. It is. Thoryn, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Such a pleasure. Thank you, Andrea.
For people who want to learn more, I did put your LinkedIn, your Instagram, and the website. So
Great.
would you say people could just go there and join the wait list if they want to get into
Yep,
protocol?
100%. Yep, Brain.One. And we're also working on a new product called Peptides.One for people looking for safe information on peptides. But yeah, they can definitely come and join the wait list and mention your name, and we'll put them to the front.
Oh, sounds good. And I look forward to getting my protocol, and I'll do a follow-up to this, and I'll tie
Great.
it to
Love
once
to.
I get my
Yeah,
protocol.
let's do it.
Thank
Okay,
you.
sounds great, Andrea. Thank you so
Thanks
much.
so much. Some final thoughts. Thoryn Stephens challenged me to think differently about what it truly means to take ownership of our health. For many of us, the journey begins with awareness. For me, it started when I began tracking my recovery and strain with a wearable device. And that data sparked deeper questions about my own protocols, how I sleep, how I recover, how I regulate stress, and how small daily behaviors compound over time. I continue to wake up around 4 a.m., use an infrared sauna as a part of my recovery routine, practice meditation, I incorporate red light therapy, and thoughtfully experiment with supplements. But what this conversation reinforced for me is something even deeper than this. Optimization is not about obsession. It's about alignment. When I discovered Dr. Dan Siegel's Wheel of Awareness meditation a few years ago, I realized that connection to self and to others is as essential as any biomarker that we track. Numbers matter, but meaning matters more. And if you're listening and wondering where to begin, the most powerful takeaway from today's conversation is this. Change doesn't require an overhaul. It requires a micro shift. Drink more water, improve sleep by 15 minutes, take a daily walk, reduce one inflammatory habit. Small adjustments, repeated consistently, become transformation. And equally important, if your pursuit of optimization begins to reduce your joy, pause for a minute, recalibrate. Performance without well-being is not progress. And if you'd like to explore your own personalized protocol, just visit Brain.One and join their waitlist like I'm doing. I'll be sharing my experience once I receive my own AI design protocol based on my own biomarkers. And next week, we continue our Season 15 review, revisiting past conversations to understand how these foundational brain systems connect. Because when the systems align, results follow. We'll see you next week.